A train just disappeared into a building. Not around it, through it. 6th floor, straight through the concrete, out the other side, gone. And the people standing beneath it aren't running. They're filming. Because in this city, that's Tuesday. This is Chongqing, a place with no flat ground to build on, wedged between 2 rivers and a wall of mountains, where the ground floor of a building can legally be the 22nd floor, where a shopping mall entrance on one street is a rooftop on the next. I came here for 3 days to figure out how a city this broken on paper became one of the most advanced urban machines on Earth. Here's the question that's going to bother you for the next 20 minutes. How do you build a functioning megacity in a place where a city literally should not exist? Because that train through the building isn't even the strangest thing here. There's a hotel sky bridge suspended 250 meters in the air, connecting 4 different skyscrapers, 300 meters long, floating over the exact spot where 2 of China's biggest rivers physically collide. There's a metro station buried so deep that riding the escalator down to the platform is the equivalent of descending a 31-story building underground. And there's a highway interchange with 5 stacked levels and roughly 20 ramps braided into each other, built to move traffic in 8 directions at once, in a space that would normally hold 1 flat intersection. None of it should work. All of it does. We'll come back to why. Two hours on the bullet train, and the landscape outside the window just stops making sense. Flat farmland gives way to ridgelines, and the ridgelines are covered in skyscrapers. Not beside the mountains, on them, in them. Step off the train, and the heat hits first, 34 degrees, and it's not even peak summer. Locals call Chongqing one of China's 3 furnaces for a reason, and you feel exactly why in the first 90 seconds outside the station. Then you get to Liziba. It's just a normal city block until you look up and there's a hole in a 19-story apartment tower, and every 7 to 9 minutes a monorail train comes screaming out of it like the building is breathing. Crowds gather on the platform below just to watch it happen. Phones up, gasping. Nobody here designed this as a stunt. It's just how the trains get from one side of the mountain to the other. But standing under it, watching a train punch through someone's home, you start to understand this city runs on different rules than anywhere else you've been. Quick one for you. Has your city ever done something to your sense of direction that just broke your brain? Mine was getting off a Tokyo subway and walking out the wrong exit into a completely different neighborhood. Drop it in the comments. I want to hear the worst one. To understand any of this, you have to understand the ground it's sitting on, because Chongqing didn't choose to be strange. It was forced into it. Chongqing sits on the Yuzhong Peninsula, a narrow spit of land squeezed at the exact point where the Yangtze River meets the Jialing River. Water on 3 sides. Behind it, the ridgelines of the Daba Mountains rise hundreds of meters within a few hundred meters of horizontal distance. There is no flat ground here to speak of. Every other major city on Earth expanded outward across plains. Chongqing had 2 rivers and a wall of rock, and nowhere to go but up, down, and sideways, all at once. Long before skyscrapers, this terrain was actually the point. During the Chinese resistance against Japanese occupation in the 20th century, Chongqing served as the wartime capital. Its cliffs and caves used as natural bomb shelters when the rest of the country couldn't offer that kind of protection. The mountains that make this city impossible to build on are the same mountains that once made it impossible to destroy. So when the population exploded from a regional city into a metropolis of over 30 million people across its municipal area, planners faced a choice nowhere else in the world had to make at this scale: flatten the mountains or build around them. Chongqing chose the mountain. Every road, every station, every tower since has been a negotiation with rock instead of a fight against it. That negotiation produced two structures that shouldn't exist in the same city, let alone a few kilometers apart. First, the crystal. 8 towers rise out of a shared base, right where the two rivers meet, and near the top, 4 of them are locked together by an enclosed sky bridge 300 meters long, floating 250 meters above the ground. Restaurants inside it, gardens inside it, an observation deck inside it. From below, it looks like someone balanced a spaceship on top of 4 buildings. From an engineering standpoint, it had to be built to survive wind loads coming off 2 rivers and seismic activity, which is why the structural frame reads less like a building and more like a bridge that happens to have skyscrapers as its foundations. Second, and this is the one that gets weirder the longer you sit with it, Liziba Station again. Because here's the part most videos skip. Real people live in that building, above the train line and below it. Every 7 to 9 minutes, for their entire lives, a train roars directly through their home. On paper, that sounds like a nightmare. In practice, the structure was engineered specifically to absorb the noise and vibration before it reaches the living spaces, turning what should be a deal breaker into something residents barely register anymore. Is that a triumph of design or a compromise nobody would accept anywhere else? Depends who you ask. Either way, it's still running, decades later, exactly as built. So here's where we land, halfway through this city. How do you make a train roar through someone's living room every few minutes and still call the result livable, let alone advanced? The Crystal and Liziba aren't outliers. They're the same idea, twice. Chongqing never tried to make the terrain behave. It made the buildings behave instead. Here's the O moment. Chongqing's entire logic is built on one idea most cities never have to consider. Ground level isn't fixed, it's local. A 30-story residential tower here might have a legitimate street entrance on the 1st floor, another on the 12th, and another on the 20th, each one connecting to a completely different road, on a completely different hillside, at a completely different elevation. What looks like a rooftop plaza from one direction is a ground floor public square from another. Locals describe this as an 8D city, a place with more usable dimensions than a flat map can represent. The transit network was built the same way. Over 500 kilometers of rail lines, several of them punched straight through mountain ridges instead of routed around them, because routing around would have added hours. Elevated highways cross the city 50 to 60 meters above the valley floor, heights that would be reserved for aircraft approaches almost anywhere else, while local roads and pedestrian bridges thread underneath, connecting markets and homes across 15 or more vertical stories inside a single city block. It's not one city, it's stacked layers of city, each with its own version of ground, all wired together. Slow down for a second, because the engineering isn't the whole story. The feeling of this place is its own kind of chaos. It's a city that disappears into itself. Chongqing sits under fog more than 100 days a year, and at night, the skyline doesn't stop at a rooftop. It just fades into mist, buildings floating mid-air with no visible top or bottom. Add the neon spilling off Hongyadong's cliffside terraces, reflecting off wet pavement, and it stops looking like a city and starts looking like a movie set nobody bothered to strike. And then there's the food, because you cannot separate this place from its hot pot. Locals lean into the humidity here the same way they lean into the terrain, with chili oil and Sichuan peppercorn strong enough to make your lips go numb, a local remedy for the dampness that's been passed down for generations. There's a restaurant here holding the Guinness World Record for largest hot pot restaurant on Earth. Nearly 6,000 seats, built into a hillside, lit up like its own skyline at night. Old air raid shelters from the wartime years have been converted into hot pot dens. History repurposed and still spicy. Before the sky bridges and the buried metro stations, there was a much quieter proof of concept, sitting quietly on a slope above the Yangtze since 1993. 6 residential blocks, all rising to the exact same height above the riverline. Except because the ground beneath them drops so unevenly, those blocks range anywhere from 10 to 26 actual stories tall. Multiple bridges link the buildings at different floor levels. Some units have front doors on what would be considered the 8th floor of the neighboring block. It's unglamorous. Nobody's filming it for Instagram, but it's the first real blueprint for everything that came after, proof that Chongqing's whole philosophy could actually be built, decades before the crystal or Liziba made it famous. Here's the part that actually earns the claim in the title. Chongqing's vertical chaos wasn't designed top-down by one architect with a master plan. It grew, block by block, decade by decade, as each new project simply adapted to whatever slope, cliff, or riverbank it was handed. Roads went wherever the terrain allowed them to go. Buildings got sited wherever a foundation could actually hold. And when a transit line ran into an existing residential block, the answer wasn't to tear the block down, it was to route the train straight through it, which is the real story behind Liziba. Which means the thing that looks like futuristic planning is actually the opposite. It's what happens when a city refuses to fight its terrain for 100 years straight, and instead lets every generation of builders negotiate with it, layer by layer. Other cities are only now starting to study this, deliberately stacking transit, housing, and public space across multiple vertical levels because density demands it. Chongqing has been doing it by necessity since before most of those cities' skylines existed. It isn't ahead, because it planned better. It's ahead because it never had the luxury of building flat. There's one more layer to this city that has nothing to do with height. Walk through what used to be Chongqing's old industrial zones and you'll find factory floors that once built machinery for a nation at war, now holding independent cafes, design studios, and art galleries. A neighborhood built for survival is now a neighborhood built for coffee and creative work. The bones didn't change. The purpose did. Even the wartime air raid shelters, built to keep people alive during bombing runs, are now full of people ordering extra spicy hot pot on a Friday night. Nothing here gets demolished if it can be repurposed instead. The city seems to remember everything it's survived. So, how do you build a city where the ground never stays where you expect it? You stop expecting the ground to behave. Chongqing never beat the mountain. It just stopped trying to and built something that moves with it instead. Trains through buildings, sky bridges over rivers, 100 vertical layers wired into one skyline. That's not a design trick. That's 100 years of learning to build with what you're given instead of against it.